SpaceX will not be launching Starship Flight 12 this month. And the reason isn't because Ship 39 or Booster 19 ran into trouble. In fact, both vehicles are making better progress than ever right now. So, what's the real reason behind this delay? Let's break it all down in today's episode of Alpha Tech. SpaceX has just had a really great week at Starbase, a week where they hit several key milestones in preparation for Starship Flight 12. First, on the 10th, SpaceX successfully installed all 20 booster hold-down clamp arm hoods. Just a few days earlier, they also finished installing a new actuator for the chopsticks on Pad 2. And most recently, the scaffolding around Ship 39 was removed, a clear sign that updates to the vehicle are now complete. Ship 39 is expected to roll out to Massey site soon for cryogenic testing, where it'll undergo cold pressure checks. But here's the twist. Despite all of this sounding like great news, real progress that feels like a late-month launch is right around the corner, that's actually not the case. So, why not? To understand that, we need to connect the dots and walk through what's really been happening. Let's talk about Ship 39. Once the scaffolding was removed, we finally got a clear look at what SpaceX has been doing to this vehicle. And it turns out, a lot of the work focused on the heat shield system. More specifically, SpaceX spent several days painting strange white, 3-dot markings onto the ceramic tiles. These markings line up precisely with the tile mounting plates or attachment pins. Many people believe these dots are reference marks, possibly to guide drilling or to inspect how well the pins hold up under extreme heat. The goal may be to test how securely the tiles stay attached when exposed to plasma during atmospheric re-entry, without removing large sections of tiles like on previous flights. The same kind of markings were also spotted on Ship 40's nose cone. But here's where it gets interesting. On Ship 39's nose cone, there are vertical lines running down the center, almost like separation markers. On the left side, each heat shield tile has 3 white dots, while on the right side, each tile has just 1 dot, placed near the upper edge of the ceramic tile. What's even stranger is that many of these mark spots don't appear to have been drilled at all. And since the scaffolding has already been removed, it's unlikely that more drilling will happen. So, what do you think these white markings on the heat shield are really for? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And here's the key takeaway. This marking process alone took 9 full days inside Megabay 2, starting from when scaffolding first went up around Ship 39 on the 2nd. That timeline goes well beyond what we originally expected. And it's a major reason why a Flight 12 launch this month is now looking increasingly unlikely. In other words, Ship 39 isn't rolling out to Massey site anytime soon. Right now, SpaceX is prioritizing test tank operations first. On January 9th, a ship cryo stand was moved into Megabay 2, and the test tank labeled S39.1 was lifted onto that stand. The plan was to transport it to Massey site for cryogenic testing, with road closures scheduled from midnight to 4 a.m. on the 12th. So, by the time you're watching this video, that test tank has already rolled out to Massey. The goal here is cryogenic testing, loading the tank with supercooled liquid propellants like methane and liquid oxygen to check structural strength, leaks, and overall integrity under extreme cold and pressure. This process typically takes at least 2 to 3 days, and only if those tests go well will Ship 39 itself be cleared to roll out to Massey's site. After what happened with Booster 18, SpaceX has clearly become more cautious. These days, they usually test the tanks first before risking the full vehicle. Realistically, that means Ship 39 probably won't reach Massey until around January 15th or 16th. Once it gets there, it'll need at least 1 full day for pressure testing. After that, Ship 39 would roll back to Megabay 2 for additional work, installing the aft flaps and, most importantly, 6 Raptor engines. And it doesn't end there. Once the engines are installed, Ship 39 has to return to Massey's site again for static fire testing. Normally, SpaceX runs 2 tests. First, a single-engine static fire using 1 sea-level Raptor at high thrust, followed by a full static fire to test the entire propulsion system. When you add it all up, installation time, multiple transports, static fires, and then rolling the vehicle back yet again, you're looking at least 2 more weeks. That pushes Ship 39's readiness to around January 29th or 30th. and that's cutting it extremely close, especially if SpaceX still needs to schedule road closures to move both Ship 39 and Booster 19 out to Launch Pad 2 for final launch preparations. So, because of all that, a launch window in the second week of February looks far more realistic, and honestly a lot more comfortable for SpaceX if they want to deliver a truly clean, impressive flight. And while we're at it, let's talk about Booster 19. Since December 24th, the day SpaceX confirmed that stacking was complete, nearly 20 days have passed, and we still haven't seen any major updates. That's because Booster 19 has been kept tucked behind the doors of Megabay 1 for internal inspections. Thanks to these images shared by Senator John Cornyn, taken just yesterday during his visit to Starbase, we're now getting a closer look at the base of Booster 19 inside the Megabay. And as you can see, there's still a fair amount of work left before it can roll out to Massey's site for cryogenic testing. And even once those checks are done, SpaceX can't cryo-test Ship 39 and Booster 19 at the same time. For safety reasons, only one vehicle can undergo cryogenic testing in that area at once. That alone further confirms that Flight 12 isn't launching this month. A lot of people agree that pushing the schedule to mid-February makes much more sense. It gives SpaceX a healthier buffer. Trying to force a January launch could mean rushing things, and we've already seen how that can backfire, like with Booster 18. Rushing now would only lead to more delays later. In short, waiting a few extra weeks may be exactly what SpaceX needs to make Flight 12 a success. Do you agree? If you do, drop a "Go SpaceX" in the comments. If Starship Flight 12 really ends up flying in mid-February, it could land very close to the launch window for Artemis II, a mission that NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman recently described as, "Artemis II is a 10-day flight test of SLS and Orion that will send astronauts farther than any human mission before. It is the next step toward returning Americans to the lunar surface and building sustained missions at the moon." In other words, this mission is essentially a modern-day replay of Apollo 8. Back in 1968, astronauts Frank Borman, James Lovell, and William Anders became the first humans to leave Earth orbit and travel to the moon. They completed 10 lunar orbits in about 20 hours, captured historic images of the lunar surface, and broadcast live back to Earth, all without landing. The key difference this time is duration. Artemis II will last longer, largely because Orion's life support system, known as ECLSS, is far more advanced than anything flown during the Apollo era. Orion can support its crew independently for up to 21 days, limited mainly by onboard consumables. In an emergency scenario, such as a loss of cabin pressure, astronauts can rely on their spacesuits, which remain connected to the spacecraft via umbilicals, allowing them to survive for several days. These systems have been extensively tested on the ground, and some components have flight heritage from the ISS. But Artemis II will be the most critical real-world test yet, validating Orion's reliability before attempting longer and more complex missions, including a crewed lunar landing. That said, the mission still carries significant risk. This will be the first crewed flight of Orion, and any serious failure could have catastrophic consequences, echoing past tragedies like Challenger and Columbia. Furthermore, one of the biggest concerns right now is Orion's heat shield. During Artemis I, it experienced unexpected char loss and cracking. NASA later traced the root cause to gas trapped inside the AVCOAT material, which led to cracking and material shedding during re-entry. Instead of replacing the heat shield already installed on Artemis II, a move that could delay the mission by years, engineers decided to keep the existing design and adjust the re-entry profile instead. The new plan calls for higher heat loads over a shorter period of time, reducing the risk of large-scale cracking. This approach is backed by extensive modeling and arc-jet testing. NASA says this strategy maintains an adequate safety margin. Their analyses show that even in a worst-case damage scenario, the underlying composite structure can withstand temperatures of up to 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit for the required duration. We have full confidence in the Orion spacecraft and its heat shield, based on rigorous analysis and the dedication of our engineering teams who have been closely tracking the data throughout the process, Isaacman said. NASA is expected to soon roll out the SLS rocket and the Orion spacecraft to the launch pad for the first time at Kennedy Space Center in Florida, marking the start of final integration, testing, and launch rehearsals. The agency is targeting the multi-hour rollout from the Vehicle Assembly Building to Launch Pad 39B No earlier than Saturday, January 17th. The 4-mile journey aboard Crawler Transporter 2 is expected to take up to 12 hours. A wet dress rehearsal, or full propellant loading test, is planned for late January, with the earliest possible launch window opening on February 6, 2026. Teams are working around the clock to complete all remaining tasks ahead of rollout. However, the target dates could still shift if additional technical work is required or if weather conditions interfere. "We are getting closer and closer to Artemis II, with rollout just around the corner," said Lori Glaze, NASA's acting associate administrator for the Exploration Systems Development Mission Directorate. "We still have critical steps ahead on the path to launch, and crew safety will remain our top priority at every stage as we move toward returning humans to the moon." At the end of the day, we're on the verge of witnessing 2 historic flights. One will prove that humanity can return to lunar orbit after more than half a century. The other will demonstrate the reliability of a vehicle designed not just to take humans back to the moon, but to lay the foundation for Moonbase Alpha, and eventually, life on Mars. No matter how these missions turn out, one thing is already clear. Both SpaceX and NASA are making massive contributions to the future of space exploration. Turning to more recent news, on January 11th, SpaceX launched the Twilight mission aboard a Falcon 9 rocket. On this flight, 2 orbital data center nodes from Axiom Space were successfully deployed into orbit. Known as ODC nodes 1 and 2, this marks a major milestone in Axiom Space's plan to roll out a network of free-flying data centers in low Earth orbit. These nodes are part of the Axiom Orbital Data Centers program, designed to meet the rapidly growing demand for in-space computing and data storage. The system will support operations like on-orbit data processing, artificial intelligence workloads in space, and connectivity with other satellite networks. That includes Kepler Communications, whose optical satellites were also launched on the same mission. Axiom Space confirmed on X that this launch represents a key step toward building off-Earth data infrastructure, helping turn space into a truly viable economic platform. Just yesterday, the entire production site at Starbase was effectively shut down for the whole day, all just to prepare the site and welcome a high-level government delegation. More specifically, it was a visit from the U.S. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, joined by several senior Pentagon officials. Also present was Texas Senator John Cornyn, a key figure who has long supported NASA funding and SpaceX contracts through congressional committees. The meeting itself took place inside the Star Factory, and as you can see, the setup was surprisingly minimal. But what really grabbed everyone's attention were 6 pristine Raptor 3 engines surrounding the stage, polished to perfection. SpaceX even used blue lighting to make them stand out. Right beside them sat a massive section of Starship, already fitted with ceramic heat shield tiles. Honestly, it was the perfect way to impress the guests, not with flashy decorations, but with the hardware itself. This meeting came just days after SpaceX secured a contract worth more than $739 million from the U.S. Space Force to launch missile tracking and early warning satellites. It also marked a key stop in the nationwide Arsenal of Freedom tour, an initiative aimed at rebuilding and revitalizing America's defense industrial base. Elon Musk was the first to take the stage. He said it was an honor to welcome the delegation and briefly shared SpaceX's long-term vision to make Star Trek real, to make Starfleet and the Starfleet Academy real, so that space isn't always just science fiction, but something that eventually becomes science fact. And at the center of that vision, he said, are the massive Starship vehicles SpaceX is building right now. To some people, this might sound like the imagination of a grown-up kid dreaming big, but not to Pete Hegseth. By that point, Hegseth had already toured Starbase himself, walking through the Megabay assembly buildings and visiting the launch pads. So, when he stepped onto the stage, he openly thanked Elon Musk and voiced his full support for that vision. Throughout his speech, Hegseth repeatedly praised SpaceX, saying,
"Team, there's nothing like this in America. There's nothing like this in the world."
He was pointing to the sheer scale and speed at which SpaceX went from nothing, from scratch, to building an entire fleet of Falcon 9, Falcon Heavy, Dragon, and now Starship. Something that, in his words, he had never seen at NASA, Blue Origin, Boeing, or Lockheed Martin. He went on to say that what SpaceX has built, and continues to build, is a living example of the American spirit of innovation, proving that large-scale, high-speed manufacturing is still possible in the United States. In contrast, Hegseth criticized legacy defense contractors for spending decades chasing perfect systems. SpaceX, he argued, has shown that America needs a new playbook, one that moves faster, cuts through bureaucracy, and prioritizes innovation driven by private companies like SpaceX if the U.S. wants to maintain its technological edge. This also signals that, in 2026, the Department of Defense is heading toward a major internal overhaul, one clearly inspired by SpaceX. Starbase has become the most visible example of a fast-moving, reusable, low-bureaucracy production model that the Trump-Hegseth administration wants to apply across the entire U.S. defense system. And the first step is already taking shape, reducing reliance on slow, underperforming legacy contractors. The clearest example is Boeing and its troubled project to replace the next presidential aircraft, the VC-25B, better known as the new Air Force One. Back in 2018, Boeing signed a fixed-price contract worth $3.9 billion to convert two Boeing 747-8 aircraft into highly secure presidential jets, equipped with classified communications, missile defense systems, and protection against electromagnetic pulses. The company promised to deliver the first aircraft by 2024. But as of January 2026, the program has been repeatedly delayed, now pushed all the way to mid-2028. That's nearly 4 years behind the original schedule, with total costs ballooning to an estimated $5 to $6 billion. The U.S. government, and President Trump in particular, has made its frustration very clear, repeatedly and publicly criticizing Boeing. The VC-25B program has increasingly come to symbolize everything the administration sees as wrong with legacy defense contractors: slow, inefficient, and wasteful. In contrast to Boeing, SpaceX has built a long and highly effective working relationship with the U.S. Department of Defense, now referred to as the Department of War, standing out for its rapid execution, lower costs, and high reliability. Since 2020, SpaceX has captured a dominant share of missions under the National Security Space Launch, or NSSL, program for the U.S. Space Force, securing contracts worth billions of dollars. Most notably, in early 2026, SpaceX was awarded a $739 million contract for 9 critical national security satellite launches, scheduled to fly between late 2026 and 2028. Earlier, in 2025, SpaceX also won $714 million for 5 out of 7 missions in Lane 2 of NSSL Phase 3. Thanks to launch prices that are roughly 30 to 50% lower than previous alternatives, SpaceX's total NSSL contract value has now pulled far ahead of its competitors. And the fact that this delegation chose to visit Starbase sends a clear signal. The partnership is no longer just about launching satellites on Falcon 9. There's something bigger on the table, and it almost certainly involves Starship. That message came through loud and clear in a recent post by Pete Hegseth on X, where he wrote, "Starbase is a testament to the strength of American ingenuity and invention. Keep going, Elon Musk." Alongside the post were a series of photos, Hegseth standing with Elon Musk, the two shaking hands. Moments where Musk is seen explaining just how powerful the Raptor engine is and what kind of technology goes into it. There were also images of the delegation looking up in awe inside Mega Bay 2, where Ship 39 had just completed inspections and heat shield installation. It turns out there was a reason Ship 39 hadn't been rolled out to Massey site for cryogenic testing yet. SpaceX intentionally kept it inside Mega Bay, giving the Pentagon delegation a first-hand, up-close look at just how massive this vehicle really is. And at that moment, it's hard to imagine no one asking the obvious question: what if Starship were adapted for military use? Because that idea has already been on the table for years. The most significant military application under study is the Rocket Cargo, or Point-to-Point Delivery Program, led by the U.S. Space Force, AFRL, and U.S. Transcom since 2021. The concept is simple but radical, using large, reusable rockets like Starship to transport 30 to 100 tons of cargo, or even personnel, to anywhere on Earth in under 1 hour via suborbital flight. This capability would be game-changing in high-intensity conflicts, especially in regions like the Indo-Pacific. It enables rapid resupply, emergency logistics, cargo airdrops, or even direct support to naval forces, without relying on slow and vulnerable sea or air routes. SpaceX has already received research contracts for this program, roughly $102 million starting in 2022, with additional funding allocated in fiscal year 2025 and fiscal year 2026. And Starship stands out as the leading candidate, thanks to its massive payload capacity, precise vertical landing capability, and full reusability. Imagine a Starship variant without a heat shield, because it wouldn't need to reach orbit or perform a full re-entry. Instead, it would fly suborbitally around the planet, still equipped with its aerodynamic flaps and landing legs, capable of touching down almost anywhere on Earth. While early test plans at Johnston Atoll were paused in mid-2025 due to environmental concerns, the program itself has not been canceled. The Department of Defense continues to search for alternative test locations, with a demonstration flight now targeted for late fiscal year 2025 or sometime in 2026. The DoD has also explored the idea of operating Starship under a government-owned, government-operated model for sensitive or high-risk missions, including support for cislunar operations and broader national security objectives. According to Hegseth, the ultimate goal is to restore the United States as the global leader in artificial intelligence, all in service of building what he calls the nation's 21st century fighting force.
If you talk to Elon Musk long enough, he will tell you how important hypersonics and long-range drones are, and he's 100% correct.
So, it's not hard to see why this visit to Starbase may have been more than just a tour. It could very well be a step toward deeper cooperation and the early groundwork for a dedicated, defense-focused version of Starship. In addition, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has officially announced that Grok, the AI chatbot developed by Elon Musk through XAI, will be integrated into the U.S. Department of Defense network, operating alongside Google's AI systems, such as Gemini, across both unclassified and classified environments. Hegseth emphasized that Grok will go live as early as this month, and that it will be given access to all relevant data from military IT systems and intelligence databases. The goal, he said, is to turn the U.S. military into an AI-first warfighting force. He also made it clear that the Pentagon's AI will be not woke, prioritizing real combat effectiveness and operational risk-taking over ideology. This move is strategically massive for SpaceX. It further cements the company's position as a top-tier defense partner, on top of the billions of dollars it already earns from DoD contracts through satellite launches and military Starlink services. It also opens the door for access to large-scale military data, which could help train and refine AI systems that optimize rocket launches, analyze real-time Starlink data, or even support the development of Starship for defense, lunar, and Mars missions. At the same time, having XAI and Grok, chosen by the Pentagon, significantly boosts the value of Elon Musk's entire ecosystem. It attracts more investment, strengthens public-private cooperation, and creates long-term competitive advantages over traditional rivals like ChatGPT or Gemini. In short, for SpaceX, this visit to Starbase wasn't just symbolic, it was like striking gold. So far, Starship has already flown 11 times, yet not a single flight has seen the upper stage fully reach orbit. Meanwhile, Blue Origin's New Glenn has only flown twice. To be fair, its upper stage reached orbit on the very first flight. And on the second mission, it not only successfully deployed NASA satellites, but also pulled off a clean booster landing on a drone ship. A lot of people love to cling to this comparison and use it as a weapon against SpaceX, to criticize it, to mock it, to talk it down. But ironically, those attacks often end up highlighting SpaceX's achievements even more. First of all, New Glenn's upper stage isn't a spacecraft. It's simply a vacuum-optimized second stage, similar to Falcon 9's second stage or any traditional rocket. Expendable, used once, and done. Starship's upper stage, on the other hand, is a massive vehicle, 9 meters in diameter, over 50 meters long, designed to do far more than just deploy satellites, and crucially, it's built to be reusable. And as for the New Glenn booster, sure, it has landed on a drone ship once. That's something Falcon 9 has been doing weekly, sometimes even daily. Meanwhile, SpaceX's Super Heavy has already landed 3 times on Mechazilla, something no one else on Earth has ever done. Yes, Starship hasn't reached orbit yet, because SpaceX's engineers designed it from the ground up, not by copying or adapting traditional launch vehicle designs that already existed. And just look at the progression, flight by flight, from ITF-1 all the way to ITF-11. We've gone from vehicles losing control to violent mid-air explosions, to Starship successfully deploying payloads on suborbital trajectories, surviving brutally harsh re-entries almost flawlessly, and even pulling off fully controlled landing maneuvers. This program isn't standing still. Starship is growing up, and it's doing so at an incredible pace. If this momentum holds, then realistically, just 2 or 3 more flights could be enough for SpaceX to hit that ambitious milestone, sending Starship into orbit for the first time. And this is something Elon Musk clearly anticipated. In one tweet, he said, "Starship catch is probably flight 13 to 15, depending on how well V3 flights go." But that target was set before Booster 18, which had been prepared for Flight 12, suffered a rupture at Massey's. Now that schedules have slipped, SpaceX will almost certainly recalibrate its goals for the upcoming flights. That means a ship catch on the tower could be pulled earlier, potentially anywhere from Flight 12 to Flight 14. However, under the original plan, Starship was supposed to reach orbit before attempting a tower catch. So, will it happen on Flight 12? Definitely not. Because on Flight 12, SpaceX's top priority will be validating the upgraded V3 structure and systems. That includes the increased thrust from 6 brand new Raptor 3 engines on Starship. Yes, SpaceX has said these engines have already accumulated over 40,000 seconds of runtime at McGregor, simulating real flight profiles. But none of that replaces a true flight test. Reaching true orbit isn't just about raw power. It demands engines that operate flawlessly in the harsh vacuum of space, with 0 extreme vibrations, perfect combustion stability, and reliable in-space relights when needed. Any hiccup could spell disaster. On top of that, to actually reach low Earth orbit, Starship must accelerate to an orbital velocity of roughly 7.8 kilometers per second. But that's only the ideal number in a perfect vacuum with no gravity. In reality, the rocket has to fight Earth's gravity, pulling it back the whole way up, known as gravity drag, and punch through the thick atmosphere at the start, creating atmospheric drag. Together, those losses add up to roughly 1.5 to 2 kilometers per second, meaning the full stack needs to deliver a total delta V of more than 9 kilometers per second from the ground. And that's where the numbers start to get truly mind-blowing. The Super Heavy booster, armed with 33 Raptor 3 engines, produces around 9,250 tons of liftoff thrust, already making it the most powerful rocket ever built. After separation, the Starship upper stage takes over, with 6 Raptor engines adding another approximately 1,680 to 1,800 tons of thrust to finish the orbital insertion. On paper, those numbers are more than enough to push a vehicle as massive as Starship into orbit, but the risk is still there. One engine failure at the wrong moment could mean loss of control, and if that happens, it doesn't just hand critics fresh headlines, it also pushes other critical milestones even further down the road. That's why it makes far more sense to validate the new hardware first. Beyond the engines, Flight 12 will also test the upgraded hot staging ring and the improved grid fins on Super Heavy. On the ship itself, attention will be firmly on the revised heat shield design. If Flight 12 goes well, then Flight 13 could be the moment the largest spacecraft ever built truly reaches orbit for the first time. And that's not just a nice milestone, it's a fundamental requirement. Without reaching orbit, any activity carried out in space lacks long-term value. A launch vehicle that can't achieve orbit can't reliably deliver payloads, let alone support more advanced missions like on-orbit refueling. And according to the current timeline, SpaceX is expected to demonstrate orbital refilling as early as June this year. That alone gives us a pretty clear idea of what Flight 13 will need to accomplish. First, SpaceX will need to confirm and close out any issues that might show up during Flight 12. If everything goes smoothly, the next step will be to validate stable orbital flight, including Raptor engine relights in space, a critical capability. Second, they'll almost certainly continue testing large-scale payload deployment, likely releasing 8 to 10 Starlink simulators to demonstrate that Starship can deliver up to 150 tons to low Earth orbit. It's also possible, though less likely, that Flight 13 could include a long-duration orbital test, where the ship stays in LEO for an extended period. The main goal there would be to accurately measure real-world propellant boil-off rates, providing baseline data for future orbital refueling sequences. And just to clarify what boil-off actually means, Starship uses liquid methane and liquid oxygen stored at extremely cold temperatures, hundreds of degrees below zero. Even in the vacuum of space, with excellent insulation, a small amount of heat from the sun, or from the vehicle itself, inevitably leaks in. Over time, that causes the propellant to slowly boil and vent away as gas. Left unchecked, you could lose around 0.3 to 0.5% of your propellant per day. That may sound small, but for large, long-duration missions, it's more than enough to derail the entire plan. Now, coming back to the landing mission. If Flight 13 successfully reaches orbit, the re-entry and splashdown profile would change significantly compared to the earlier suborbital flights. From IFT-3 through IFT-11, SpaceX targeted splashdowns in the Indian Ocean, thousands of kilometers away from Starbase. That choice was all about safety, keeping debris far from land, while collecting baseline re-entry data with minimal risk. With Flight 13, SpaceX could opt for a much longer trajectory, allowing the ship to complete 1 or even 2 full orbits before deorbiting. The most practical option would be re-entry over the Pacific Ocean, with splashdown farther west, possibly near Hawaii or the Central Pacific. This would allow SpaceX to test the heat shield at a different angle of attack and gather longer duration thermal data during re-entry. A more ambitious scenario would push the trajectory even further, enabling re-entry over the Atlantic Ocean, with splashdown to the east, potentially near the African coast or the Central Atlantic. That would require higher delta V to complete more orbits, possibly 3 to 5, but it would be a critical test of downrange return capability. Ultimately, that kind of profile is a stepping stone toward bringing Starship back to land, returning for direct recovery at Starbase or Florida once Tower catches mature around Flight 15. And next comes Flight 14, which I see as the third flight of the year, potentially taking place sometime between June and July. This is where SpaceX's original vision, as outlined by Elon Musk, really comes into focus, catching both Starship and Super Heavy with the tower. Under the current plan, Pad 1 would be used to catch Super Heavy, while Pad 2 would handle the Starship landing. In this scenario, both stages return to Starbase and are caught by Mechazilla's arms. That means both launch towers may need to operate simultaneously, Pad 1 receiving the booster, while Pad 2 prepares to catch the ship. Each tower is optimized for its specific stage, and Pad 2 will need time to transition from launch operations to recovery mode. The biggest challenge in this mission is the ship itself. Starship travels much farther downrange than the booster and endures a far more severe atmospheric re-entry. SpaceX will need absolute confidence that the vehicle remains structurally sound, with the heat shield performing flawlessly. The condition of the ship after re-entry will directly determine whether a precise and safe tower catch is even possible. If successful, SpaceX would become the first aerospace organization in history to recover both stages of an orbital-class rocket. And if all systems perform as intended, reuse could follow almost immediately, potentially on Flight 15, where Ship 43 or Ship 44 might become the first reused Starship prototype. That would finally unlock the long-promised potential of full and rapid reusability, dramatically lowering launch costs and pushing flight cadence to an entirely new level. Now, just a quick question. How many Starship launches do you think SpaceX will pull off this year? My personal guess is 7. What about you? Drop your prediction in the comments below. That said, the total number of Starship launches in 2026 will depend heavily on how quickly SpaceX can overcome the remaining technical challenges and establish reliable reusability. First, if the first Starship V3 flight goes smoothly, SpaceX could realistically reach 10 to 12 missions this year, but any major failure would almost certainly introduce delays. Second, reuse and mission cadence are absolutely critical for lunar ambitions. To support the large number of tanker flights required for the Artemis program, Starship needs to achieve a steady launch rhythm, ideally 1 flight per month or more. Production capacity also plays a key role. If rapid reuse isn't achieved, building new vehicles could become the bottleneck. A successful first V3 flight would pave the way for booster and ship recovery attempts in the missions that follow. And once SpaceX can reliably catch both stages, full reusability becomes real, removing hardware constraints for the rest of the year and opening the door to a much higher flight rate. This is great news. SpaceX crews are now removing the scaffolding around Ship 39 that we've been seeing since last week, a clear sign that heat shield installation and system checks are finished. If everything stays on track, in just 1 to 2 days, Ship 39 should roll out to Massey's site for cryogenic pressure testing. At the same time, on January 10th, construction teams at Pad 2 completed the installation of all 20 clamps on the orbital launch mount, the same number used at Pad 1. All 20 clamp arms are now in place and ready, although some fine-tuning may still be needed after testing. The main job of these clamps is to firmly hold the Super Heavy booster down during engine startup, preventing the rocket from lifting off too early. Only once all engines reach full thrust and the vehicle is fully stable do the clamps release, allowing the rocket to safely lift off and head toward orbit. That's just one of the similarities between Pad 1 and Pad 2. But once you start looking at the differences, you can really see how SpaceX has been upgrading the technology. The first major thing to pay attention to is the improved catching system. Back in late December, SpaceX removed a hydraulic actuator, and at the time, it looked like something might be wrong and that it was being taken away for repairs. But that wasn't the case at all. Instead, they rolled out a much larger and far more powerful hydraulic unit than the one currently used at Pad 1. And by now, it's already been installed. This component is absolutely critical. It's a massive linear hydraulic cylinder mounted between the carriage, the structure that moves up and down the tower, and each chopsticks arm. These actuators are responsible for opening and closing the chopsticks with extreme precision and speed, allowing them to securely catch either the Super Heavy booster or Starship. The system is driven by hydraulic pumps on the ground, connected through long lines and supported by accumulators mounted on the carriage, enabling lightning-fast response times. All of this points to one clear conclusion. This upgrade is a strong signal that SpaceX is actively preparing for its first-ever ship catch attempt at Pad 2. And if that still isn't convincing enough, there's another key difference between the Mechazilla arms at Pad 2 and Pad 1, the length of the chopsticks. From the very beginning of construction, the chopsticks at Pad 2 were built about 10 meters shorter than those at Pad 1. This likely traces back to Elon Musk's earlier criticism that the original arms were simply too long, adding unnecessary inertia and slowing down their response time. Shortening the arms brings some very real advantages. It reduces overall mass and inertia, allowing the system to move faster and react more quickly to catch Starship. And that matters, because Starship is significantly lighter than the Super Heavy booster, but it comes with a complication of its own: 4 large flaps. To catch Starship safely, the timing has to be perfect. The chopsticks need to grab the vehicle at the exact moment when the 2 aft flaps have dropped below the level of the arms. At that point, Starship is still descending at around 2 to 3 meters per second, so the system has to react instantly, locking onto the catch pins without delay. Any hesitation or mistimed movement could lead to a bad contact, potentially damaging both the catching system and the vehicle itself. And as you know, catching Starship is far more difficult than catching Super Heavy, mainly because of the vehicle's condition on return. Starship is coming straight out of orbit after enduring extreme temperatures, intense structural stress, and the brutal forces of atmospheric re-entry. The ship doesn't just need to be caught, it has to be stabilized immediately. That's why the Mechazilla arms have to strike a delicate balance between sheer strength and adaptability. Miss either one of those, and a successful catch simply isn't possible. That's why a lot of people say Pad 2 is meant for catching the ship, while Pad 1 is for catching Super Heavy. But that idea isn't entirely accurate. Back in late November, SpaceX also shortened the chopsticks at Pad 1, prioritizing flexibility in much the same way as Pad 2. The goal is clear: make sure either tower can catch both vehicles, providing redundancy and a solid backup option if needed. So, are there any other differences? Yes. And this one sits right beneath the launch mount at Pad 2. Pad 2 features an integrated flame trench, a critical piece of infrastructure found at many launch sites around the world. For SpaceX's Starship system, This trench is built to be exceptionally robust and heat-resistant. Its main job is to channel the intense exhaust and heat from the super heavy booster away from the launch mount during liftoff, protecting nearby hardware and significantly reducing post-launch repair work. At the center of this trench, directly beneath the launch mount, is a unique feature, a powerful water-cooled, dual-sided flame deflector, often referred to as the flame bucket. This one-of-a-kind system plays a crucial role in absorbing and redirecting the enormous exhaust plume from the engines. Feeding this deflector is what's known as the deluge farm, or high-pressure water suppression system. It works similarly to the system at Pad 1, using high pressure to spray water through outlets around the mount. However, Pad 2's deluge system is designed to hold and release significantly more water, and it's expected to operate at even higher pressures. According to the official environmental assessment for the Starship program, Pad 2's system can use up to around 422,000 gallons of water each time it's activated, whether for a static fire, a launch, or even a landing test. In past tests, the overflow discharge pipes at the water tank area produced plumes rising more than 300 feet high, taller than the quick disconnect arm on the tower itself. That might sound like an enormous amount of water, but it's far from wasteful. One of Pad 2's standout upgrades is the installation of recovery pumps inside the drainage trench, allowing water to be collected and recycled back into the storage tanks. One major edge Pad 2 has over Pad 1 is how quickly it can bounce back after an aborted attempt. Even if the water deluge system has already been triggered and the launch is called off, Pad 2 is designed for rapid cleanup and turnaround. That means once the problem is resolved, teams can realistically attempt another test or launch the very same day, a level of flexibility that Pad 1, in its current form, just can't offer. Another question many people have is why we still haven't seen SpaceX build a separate tank farm for Pad 2. The answer is simpler than it looks. At Starbase, Pad 1 and Pad 2 actually share a common main tank farm. Based on weekly updates from Starbase, this shared tank farm sits between the two pads, but the section feeding Pad 2 has been completely redesigned. It features a higher number of pumps, more subcoolers, and enhanced sub-chilling capability, all aimed at dramatically cutting down propellant loading time, potentially to under 50 minutes compared to the older Pad 1 setup. Pad 2 only shares the primary storage tanks. The ground support equipment, like pumps and subcoolers, is dedicated to each pad, specifically to avoid bottlenecks when SpaceX starts pushing a higher launch cadence. Because both pads rely on the same infrastructure, SpaceX has also expanded the tank farm by adding an extra deluge water tank, which has recently been seen being tied into the water system during flyovers. At the same time, major progress has been made on the blast wall, further protecting the area and strengthening the overall resilience of the launch site. But is simply upgrading the tank farm really enough? Each Starship launch consumes close to 5,000 tons of propellant, the equivalent of roughly 200 tanker truck deliveries for a single flight. And looking ahead to lunar missions, where 5 to 10 launches may be needed just for on-orbit refueling, it's fair to wonder whether Starbase could eventually turn into a traffic nightmare. The answer is likely no, because SpaceX has already taken concrete steps to deal with that challenge. Right at Starbase, they're building a new on-site facility known as the ASU site, designed to produce cryogenic fluids locally. Construction has been underway for more than 2 months now, and recent updates show a steady flow of new hardware being installed, pumps, small storage tanks, and other supporting equipment. If progress continues at this pace, the system is expected to come online by the end of this year. Once the on-site air separation unit at Starbase is fully operational, SpaceX will no longer need to truck in liquid oxygen and liquid nitrogen from distant suppliers. Instead, these cryogenic fluids will be transferred directly from the ASU to the shared tank farm near Pad 1 and Pad 2 through underground cryogenic pipelines. More specifically, the ASU has been deliberately placed across the highway from the main launch complex, providing both safety separation and adequate buffer distance. After LOX and LN2 are produced through cryogenic air separation and distillation, they will flow straight through these underground lines into the main storage tanks, eliminating road congestion and cutting out multiple logistical steps. Honestly, it's a very smart piece of infrastructure planning. These upgrades are going to leave upcoming high-profile visitors to Starbase genuinely impressed, And that timing is no coincidence. On January 13, 2026, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, recently redesignated as Secretary of War by order of President Trump, is set to visit Starbase in person. That day, Hegseth will stand before SpaceX leadership and the Starbase workforce, alongside Elon Musk, to deliver what will be his third major speech since taking office. His message is expected to be crystal clear. For far too long, the Pentagon has been weighed down by bureaucracy and slow-moving processes, and the sheer speed and capability of a leading space company like SpaceX represents a powerful path forward for modernizing a defense system that has struggled to keep up. The visit comes just 2 days after, on January 9th, U.S. Space Systems Command announced a $739 million contract award to SpaceX. These task orders fall under National Security Space Launch, Phase 3, Lane 1, and Cover 9, Falcon 9, launches tasked with deploying missile warning and tracking satellites for the Space Development Agency and the National Reconnaissance Office. Those missions are scheduled to begin in the fourth quarter of fiscal year 2026 and run through 2028, marking yet another major milestone as SpaceX continues to cement its dominance in national security launches, delivering low-cost access to orbit with high reliability and an execution and tempo few competitors can match. For SpaceX, this contract isn't just about steady revenue. It significantly strengthens the company's strategic position. It further expands SpaceX's role beyond the commercial sector into national security, moving from launching commercial satellites to directly supporting missile defense and reconnaissance systems. Earth behaves like a gigantic magnet. It pulls everything toward its surface: humans, objects, and yes, even the ISS. Despite orbiting at an altitude of around 400 kilometers, the space station still loses about 100 meters of altitude every single day due to atmospheric drag. Without regular reboosts month after month, the ISS wouldn't last long. Eventually, it would fall back to Earth and burn up like a shooting star. In the past, this reboost job was handled by NASA's Space Shuttle, but after the shuttle retired in 2011, the responsibility fell to Russia, specifically the Progress cargo spacecraft, a vehicle widely regarded as extremely reliable. That system stayed in place until 2022, when war broke out between Russia and Ukraine. The United States openly supported Ukraine and imposed heavy sanctions on Russia. In response, Dmitry Rogozin, then head of Roscosmos, turned the ISS into a political pressure tool. He repeatedly emphasized how dependent the U.S. was on Russia to keep the station in orbit. In multiple interviews, Rogozin openly claimed that without progress, the U.S. simply could not reboost the ISS, and even threatened an early Russian withdrawal unless sanctions were lifted. If that had actually happened, it would have triggered a massive crisis. No reboost capability would mean the ISS could survive only 1 to 2 more years, effectively ending the most important international cooperation project in space. That situation simply couldn't be allowed to happen. So NASA turned to SpaceX, looking for a solution that would reduce its reliance on Russia. In November 2024, SpaceX carried out a small but critical test, a 5-minute reboost burn using the Draco thrusters on a Cargo Dragon spacecraft. The result? A successful boost that raised the ISS by 1.1 kilometers, even though Dragon was never originally designed for station reboost operations. Since then, Cargo Dragon has performed 5 reboost maneuvers in total. The most recent one took place on December 29, 2025, using the Cargo Dragon flying the CRS-33 mission, which launched back in August. According to NASA, this latest maneuver involved more than 19 minutes of continuous firing using 2 Draco engines. It raised the ISS by 11.6 miles at apogee, the station's highest orbital point, and 1.9 miles at perigee, its lowest point. This was the longest reboost burn ever performed by Dragon, and a clear demonstration that the United States can now independently maintain the ISS's orbit, significantly reducing its dependence on Russia's Progress spacecraft. Another reboost is expected within the next 2 to 3 weeks, still later this month, before Dragon undocks from the ISS, carrying critical research and splashing down off the coast of California. Excluding the 2024 test, this means that a single docking has already supported 5 reboost maneuvers, a remarkable achievement considering that Dragon carries only enough propellant for its primary mission. Rendezvous, docking, attitude control, the deorbit burn, and a safe landing. Using the capsule's main propellant supply for long-duration reboosts, typically 10 to 20 minutes, directly eats into Dragon's safety margins. That increases the risk of having insufficient fuel for a proper deorbit or precise control during re-entry and landing. On top of that, Dragon's Draco thrusters on the capsule are not optimally aft-facing while docked, leading to cosine losses, where thrust is not applied in the desired direction. As a result, the spacecraft must burn longer to achieve the same delta V, consuming even more propellant. That's exactly why Russia was so confident in claiming the US couldn't perform independent ISS reboosts. So how did SpaceX turn the impossible into reality? It turns out that after the small reboost test in 2024, SpaceX's Dragon engineering team spent months upgrading the spacecraft. They installed 2 Draco thrusters pointing straight aft, perfectly aligned with the ISS's velocity vector. These engines are part of a dedicated boost kit mounted inside Dragon's trunk, the unpressurized section of the spacecraft. The system draws propellant from 6 dedicated tanks filled with hydrazine and nitrogen tetroxide, hypergolic propellants that ignite on contact, along with a central carbon fiber-wrapped helium pressurant tank. The propellant tanks are wrapped in silver thermal insulation to protect them in the vacuum of space. For control and communications, SpaceX leveraged the existing docking interface, minimizing new hardware. They also maximized reuse. The 2 Draco engines were taken from the Crew 8 mission, while the 6 propellant tanks came from test hardware built back in 2020. Despite using largely repurposed components, the boost kit delivers around 9 meters per second of additional delta V, or about 20 miles per hour. That's roughly 1.5 times the capability of a single Progress spacecraft, covering about a quarter to a third of the ISS's annual reboost requirement. Each Draco thruster produces about 400 newtons of thrust, roughly 800 newtons combined. That's lower than Progress's main engines, but it's deliberately optimized for long-duration burns without placing excessive structural loads on the station. Crucially, the boost kit carries its own propellant and helium supply, completely independent from Dragon's primary systems. This eliminates the risk of depleting fuel needed for the return to Earth, while the properly aligned thrusters significantly improve efficiency. Thermal insulation and built-in heaters keep the propellants from freezing or overheating in space. Thanks to this setup, Dragon can sustain engine burns lasting more than 19 minutes, far longer than a typical Progress reboost. Including the upcoming maneuver, this means Dragon will have performed 6 reboosts during a single docking, a truly remarkable leap forward. By comparison, a Progress spacecraft typically carries out just 1 or 2 reboosts over a 6-month mission. But here's the interesting part. It was geopolitical tension between the US and Russia that ultimately pushed NASA to move forward with Dragon-based reboosts. Any further delay would have prolonged dependence on Russia and put the ISS at real risk of ending up in a truly dangerous situation with no reliable way to raise its orbit in time. That risk became very real on November 27, 2025. Despite a successful launch of Soyuz MS-28 launch site 31/6 at the Baikonur Cosmodrome, currently the only pad configured to launch both crewed Soyuz and cargo Progress missions to the ISS, suffered serious damage. Part of the service structure collapsed into the flame trench, forcing Russia to halt further Soyuz and Progress launches. As a result, the Progress MS-33 mission, scheduled for December 2025, was canceled, and subsequent flights may be delayed until at least March 2026, or even later. Some experts estimate that repairs to the launch pad could take 1 to 2 years. Yes, Progress spacecraft already docked to the ISS can still perform limited reboosts, but their fuel must be preserved for a safe deorbit at the end of the mission, meaning they simply can't carry out repeated burns the way they used to. Now imagine this scenario. If SpaceX hadn't already upgraded Dragon with the boost kit, and if these powerful reboosts weren't available, combined with Russia's launch pad failure at exactly the wrong moment, the ISS could have faced a serious orbital decline within months to a year. Atmospheric drag would steadily pull the station lower, potentially pushing it into an unstable, hard-to-control orbit. or even forcing an early, unplanned deorbit. Fortunately, that earlier geopolitical friction forced NASA and SpaceX to prepare ahead of time, and when the moment came, SpaceX was ready to step in. Dragon didn't just fill the gap, it performed better than expected, helping ensure the ISS can remain safely in orbit for years to come. If there's one lesson here, it's simple. Spaceflight always needs a backup plan, and no one understands that lesson better than SpaceX. That's exactly why the company operates a fleet of 5 active Crew Dragon spacecraft: Endeavor, Resilience, Endurance, Freedom, and Grace. These are the final vehicles of the Crew Dragon line. SpaceX stopped building new ones back in 2022, shifting its focus and resources towards Starship. However, the existing spacecraft continue to be refurbished and upgraded, with a long-term goal of flying around 15 missions per capsule, made possible by Dragon's high level of reusability. Alongside Crew Dragon, SpaceX also operates 3 reusable Cargo Dragon spacecraft based on the Dragon 2 platform. These vehicles, such as C-208, C-209, and C-211, fly without seats or launch escape systems, optimized purely for cargo missions. In total, SpaceX's Dragon 2 fleet consists of 8 reusable spacecraft, all of which are actively supporting missions for NASA and commercial customers. Most Dragon missions launch from 2 primary pads: Launch Complex 39A at Kennedy Space Center and SLC-40 at Cape Canaveral, allowing SpaceX to sustain a high launch cadence well into the future. And this fleet matters more than ever. As NASA prepares to deorbit the ISS around 2030 to 2031, after more than 3 decades of continuous operation and rising maintenance costs, SpaceX's Dragon fleet will likely be working overtime, ensuring a smooth, safe, and efficient transition through the station's final years in orbit. First, Crew Dragon would take primary responsibility for crew evacuation. With 5 active spacecraft, SpaceX could rotate missions as needed, with each flight carrying up to 4 astronauts. If the ISS were operating with a reduced crew of around 7 people during its final phase, as scientific activity winds down, it would take just 2 Crew Dragon flights to bring everyone home safely within a matter of months. The bigger challenge, however, lies with Cargo Dragon. This spacecraft would effectively act as the workhorse, hauling tens of tons of critical hardware, experiments, and invaluable scientific data back to Earth. With 3 active Cargo Dragon vehicles, that demand can still be met. The pressurized capsule has a diameter of roughly 4 meters, and when combined with the trunk section, the spacecraft reaches a total length of about 8 meters. Fully loaded, a Cargo Dragon launches with a mass of around 12,000 kilograms. That capacity is crucial for preserving billions of dollars worth of scientific knowledge and equipment. Without Dragon, this task would fall to spacecraft like Cygnus or Japan's HTV-X, vehicles that are not reusable and offer far less flexibility in returning cargo to Earth. After that, when the ISS reaches the end of its service life sometime after 2030, it can't simply be abandoned. With a mass of roughly 420,000 kilograms, the station is far too large to completely burn up during an uncontrolled re-entry. Without intervention, debris could scatter across thousands of kilometers, posing a real risk to populated areas on Earth. The solution requires a dedicated deorbit vehicle, capable of executing multiple powerful burns to guide the station safely into a remote ocean region, most likely the spacecraft graveyard in the South Pacific, near Point Nemo. In today's world of tech giants, companies like Apple, Google, and Samsung all share one quiet rule for staying on top. They never stop at the current version. Take Apple, for example. The moment the iPhone 17 hits the market and starts dominating sales, Apple's engineers are already deep into work on the iPhone 18. Different teams running in parallel, all to make sure innovation never pauses. That's how they shape the future and protect their lead. And nowhere is this mindset more visible than at Elon Musk's SpaceX. Even though Falcon 9 remains the company's reliable workhorse, launching thousands of satellites into orbit every single year, SpaceX has never been satisfied with just that. Instead, they poured their energy into Starship, a gigantic spacecraft designed to take humanity back to the moon and, ultimately, to Mars. Now, as we step into 2026, we're officially entering the era of Starship version 3, a taller vehicle powered by Raptor 3 engines, with a dramatically higher payload capacity. But here's the thing. Before we've even seen the first real flight of Starship 5-3, SpaceX engineers are already hard at work on version 4, an even bolder design. And according to Elon Musk himself, Starship V4 could be up to 20% longer than V3. To be more specific, when Starship V3 is fully stacked, both stages together, it stands at about 124.4 meters tall. With version 4, that total height jumps to around 142 meters, which means the actual increase is closer to 14%. So, why does this difference exist? To understand that, we first need to look at Ship VI4 itself, the part of the vehicle specifically upgraded for Mars missions. Once completed, the ship alone will stand about 61 meters tall, nearly 9 meters taller than V3. To put that into perspective, the ship by itself will be roughly as tall as ULA's Vulcan Centaur when fully stacked. And remember, Vulcan is officially classified as a heavy-lift rocket. And this is exactly why SpaceX keeps pushing to make Starship bigger. It's all about Mars. Because to actually reach Mars, you need a huge amount of fuel. That's the key point here. By stretching the ship by nearly 9 extra meters, SpaceX can extend the internal propellant tanks as well. As a result, Starship VZ4 is expected to carry up to 2,300 tons of propellant. And as you know, Mars is far. Even at its closest approach, it's about 54.6 million kilometers, or roughly 33.9 million miles, from Earth. During the cruise phase, the Raptor engines don't need to run continuously. In space, there's no air drag, so the engines are only fired briefly to fine-tune the trajectory, slow down for Mars orbit insertion, and finally for landing. Technically speaking, the 1,600 tons of propellant on Starship V3 is already enough. The total delta V for a one-way trip from LEO is only around 4 to 6 kilometers per second. But there's a catch. At that delta V, the journey would take 6 to 8 months. And that's a serious problem. That much time in deep space means prolonged exposure to cosmic radiation, increasing cancer risk, almost like being exposed to repeated X-ray scans day after day. The longer the trip, the more food and water you burn through. And let's be clear, Starship is not the ISS. It doesn't have the same level of life support, redundancy, or comfort. This is where Starship V4's extra propellant really matters. With more fuel, the vehicle can perform a much harder burn when leaving LEO, pushing the delta V up to around 7 to 9 kilometers per second, or even higher. That alone could cut the travel time down to just 3 to 6 months. And that's exactly why SpaceX is equipping Ship V4 with 9 Raptor 3 engines, 3 sea-level engines, and 6 vacuum engines, generating an initial thrust of around 2,700 tons. More fuel, more thrust, more delta V. Less time exposed to space. And that's only the Mars transfer part of the story. Before any of that can happen, the vehicle still has to go through orbital refueling because those 9 Raptor engines will burn a massive amount of propellant just to escape Earth's gravity in the first place. With Starship V4, applying this same stretch configuration to tanker starships changes the equation entirely. Instead of a long chain of refueling launches, no more than 5 tanker flights would be enough to fully load a Starship depot. Once the Mars-bound Starship reaches orbit, it docks with the depot, and in just 1 to 2 hours, it can take on the full 2,300 tons of propellant. Then it's ready to head straight for Mars. Fewer tanker flights, shorter refueling time, lower risk, and in the end, a much higher chance of mission success. That's the real reason Elon Musk wants to make Starship bigger. But making Starship longer also means adding a lot more mass. So the obvious question is, does that put extra stress on Super Heavy during liftoff? The answer is no, because in version 4, it's not just the ship that gets stretched, the booster grows too. Super Heavy V4 is expected to stand about 81 meters tall, roughly the height of a 20-story building. That extra height allows it to carry up to 4,050 tons of propellant, more than 400 tons extra compared to version 3. The version we're about to see fly for the first time on Flight 12. There's still no official word on the exact engine count, but chances are SpaceX will stick with 33 Raptor 3 engines, or possibly even 35. Based on published figures, the booster could generate around 10,000 tons of liftoff thrust, roughly 3 times more powerful than Saturn V. At that point, the fully fueled ship would weigh about 2,500 tons. Add the mass of the booster itself, and the entire full stack comes in at roughly 6,700 tons. That gives Starship a thrust-to-weight ratio of about 1.49, meaning thrust exceeds gravity by nearly 49%. And that number matters a lot. The thrust-to-weight ratio, or TWR, is what decides whether a rocket can even leave the ground in the first place, and just as importantly, how it climbs once it does. If the TWR is below 1, the rocket simply can't lift off. At exactly 1, it barely holds itself up. But once you go above 1, that's when real flight begins. With Starship V4 sitting at around 1.5, the difference is huge. From the very first second of ignition, thrust outweighs gravity by nearly 50%, allowing the vehicle to rise off the pad aggressively and cleanly without hesitation. That strong initial acceleration means the upper stage can reach orbit more efficiently, burn less propellant overall, and ultimately cut down the number of tanker flights required. So, in the end, making Starship bigger isn't a drawback at all. It's actually one of the most important optimizations SpaceX is making, with only one destination in mind: Mars. And here's the really interesting part. We may not have to wait that long to see the first Starship V4 hardware appear. Elon Musk has already hinted at the timeline, saying, Starship version 4 will have 42 engines when 3 more Raptors are added to a significantly longer ship. That will fly in 2027. If that turns out to be accurate, then SpaceX is actually keeping a surprisingly steady pace. V1 in 2023 to 2024, V2 in 2025, V3 in 2026, and V4 in 2027. It almost sounds like Apple's iPhone cycle, one new version every year. Except here, we're not talking about a $1,000 smartphone. We're talking about the largest rocket system ever built. Just the cost of producing one Super Heavy and a full Starship stack is estimated at somewhere between $90 and $150 million. And the biggest chunk of that cost comes from the Raptor engines, by far the most complex and technologically demanding components in the entire system. On top of that, you've got infrastructure, facilities, and massive payroll expenses. Right now, a single Raptor engine is estimated to cost anywhere from $200,000 to about $1 million, with recent leaks suggesting it may already be below $500,000 thanks to continuous improvements like Raptor 3. For Starship V3, Super Heavy uses 33 engines, while the ship itself uses 6, meaning engine costs alone can reach $8 to nearly $40 million per stack, roughly 30 to 40% of total production cost. That may sound expensive, but it's still insanely cheap compared to traditional engines like NASA's RS-25, which costs around $100 million per engine. And in the long run, it's only going to get cheaper. In a recent tweet, Musk mentioned that once Gigabay, the massive new facility being built next to the Megabase, comes online, SpaceX could reach truly insane production volumes, maybe as high as 10,000 ships per year. Of course, that's just theoretical for now, because building 10,000 Starships a year would raise one very simple question: where would the money even come from? And the answer is obvious. Starship won't be mass-produced at that scale until it actually creates real value for humanity, or more realistically, until it makes a lot of money for SpaceX. Over the next 3 years, SpaceX will almost certainly start scaling back Falcon 9 launches and shift more Starlink missions over to Starship. And that makes perfect sense. Starship isn't just about the moon and Mars. Those are long-term, expensive goals. In the near term, its real job is launching satellites. Falcon 9 currently costs about $67 million per launch. Starship, on the other hand, is expected to be 6 to 10 times cheaper. Elon Musk has even floated the idea of pushing launch costs below $10 million, or, in the long run, as low as $2 to $3 million. At that point, most of the cost is basically just fuel, because Starship is designed to be fully reusable. On top of that, Starship can carry far more payload than Falcon 9, potentially 60 to 90 Starlink satellites in a single launch. Every flight like that could save SpaceX tens of millions of dollars. Multiply that over hundreds of launches, and the business case becomes very clear. So, what comes next? Can Starship actually make money from Moon or Mars missions? Absolutely. In the future, SpaceX could secure multi-billion-dollar contracts from governments or private companies, transporting scientific equipment, building lunar bases, or even supporting resource extraction, like helium-3. Some economic analyses suggest entirely new space markets worth hundreds of billions of dollars could emerge within the next decade. From a logical standpoint, the Moon becomes the economic stepping stone, a place where SpaceX can rent out space infrastructure, orbital fuel depots, lunar refueling stations, not just for Starship, but for other spacecraft